a young botanist, just broke her village's oldest rule. Elara believes the legends of the Emerald Kingdom are real, and she is willing to risk everything to prove it. Ignoring the Elder's dire warnings, she steps into the forbidden, whispering woods, a place where none from her village have dared to go for generations. Her goal is the legendary seed of Genesis, said to be the very origin of the self-made Biosphere. By the end of this story, you will uncover the hidden truth of how worlds are grown from a single, defiant act. What ancient secret waits for her deep within the sentient forest? And what price will she pay for this knowledge? What would you risk to discover a forgotten world? Vines thicker than her arms twisted and coiled, blocking the path forward with a will of their own. Elara did not run. Instead, she pressed her palms against the rough bark and began to hum, a low, resonant tone she had learned from the oldest trees near her village. The thicket stilled, its aggressive rustling softening into a curious whisper. It recognized a friend in her, a speaker of the root tongue, and the wall of vegetation slowly unraveled, granting her passage into a secluded grove bathed in an eerie, greenish light. At its center stood a stone tablet, so ancient it seemed to have grown from the earth itself, its surface alive with bioluminescent moss. The air grew cold as she approached, a primal instinct screaming at her to turn back. Something else was here, moving with a silence that was more terrifying than any sound. The forest warden was awake, and it knew an intruder had breached its sacred space. She could flee now, and maybe make it back to the village border, saving herself but losing the truth forever. Or she could reach out and touch the past. Her decision was made in a single heartbeat. Elara placed her hands flat upon the cold stone. The moss flared brighter, its light racing along carved symbols she could not read, yet somehow understood. A three-dimensional map of the forest erupted into the air above the tablet, a constellation of light points and pathways, all leading to one pulsing heart, the first grove. Triumph was a fleeting emotion. A roar of pure rage shattered the grove's silence, a sound so deep it vibrated in her bones and shook leaves from the canopy high above. The warden was coming, snatching one last look at the hovering map, its glowing lines searing themselves into her memory. Elara turned and ran. Deeper into the unknown she fled, the promise of the first grove now her only compass, and the warden's fury her relentless shadow. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but the memory of the glowing map guided her like a lodestar. The forest itself seemed to shift, branches pulling back to reveal a path only she could see, until she stumbled into a circular clearing that took her breath away. This was the first grove. The air shimmered with a palpable energy, a low, resonant hum emanating from the ancient trees that formed a perfect ring. Their bark pulsed with a soft, golden light in time with the sound, a living, breathing melody. In the center of the clearing lay a sealed door of packed earth, and before it, a circle of crystalline flowers, their petals frozen in intricate, geometric patterns. They were silent, waiting. Instinct took over. Elara began to turn the flowers, her fingers gentle on the cool crystal. Each movement produced a clear, bell-like tone, and she realized she was not solving a random puzzle, but completing a harmonic sequence, matching the dominant frequency of the tree's hum. As the final flower clicked into its correct alignment, the tones merged into one sustained, beautiful chord. The earth door responded with a deep, grinding sound, the soil pulling back to reveal a dark opening and a staircase carved not from stone, but from the massive, intertwined roots of the grove itself. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over her, the cost of channeling the grove's power. Her limbs felt heavy, her thoughts sluggish. Yet beneath the fatigue, a new fear prickled at her senses. The Warden was close, its rage a cold pressure against her mind. Should she rest here, vulnerable, or plunge into the unknown dark below? The choice was agonizing, but hesitation was a luxury she could not afford. She chose the darkness. Descending the root staircase, she turned and spoke a single, guttural word of power, a command she had absorbed from the stone tablet. The earth door sealed itself with a final, echoing thud, plunging her into absolute silence and cutting off the Warden's pursuit. But she had also trapped herself. The space below was not a tomb, but an archive of living light. Luminous fungi clung to the walls, their gentle glow illuminating vast murals depicting the birth of the forest. Strands of pure energy, like captured moonlight, wove through the air between shelves of living wood, holding shimmering seeds that pulsed with potential. Her momentary relief, shattered as a violent impact, shook the ceiling. Dirt rained down. A web of cracks spread across the sealed door above her. The Warden's fury, now a physical force, hammering against her fragile sanctuary. It would not hold. With no time to study the archive, Elara's eyes locked on one object, a single seed that glowed with an intense, heart-like rhythm. She snatched it, its warmth spreading through her palm, and turned to run. The only way was forward, into the deeper, waiting darkness of the cavern system, the sound of splintering roots roaring at her back. The root staircase spiraled down into a suffocating darkness, its steps slick with glowing, blue-green moss. Elara moved with a careful, deliberate slowness, one hand braced against the damp, organic wall. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, a sharp, acrid tang. She soon saw the source, patches of fungi that wept a clear, sizzling liquid onto the path. Pulling her cloak over her head, she used the thick wool as a shield, ducking and weaving through the acidic droplets. A soft, frantic buzzing drew her attention to a crevice where a small, winged creature, its body a pulsating lantern of soft yellow light, was trapped by a sticky, web-like resin. Its struggles were growing weaker. Without a second thought, she reached in, ignoring the burn on her fingertips as she carefully peeled the strands away. The light flyer zipped free, circling her head once before hovering just ahead, its glow illuminating the treacherous path. It was a silent offer, a guide. But trust was a fragile currency here. The decision was torn from her by a sudden, sickening crack. The root she stood on gave way, a whole section of the staircase, crumbling into the abyss below and cutting off her retreat. She was stranded on a narrow, fragile ledge, the main route now a gaping void. Heart hammering against her ribs, the walls seemed to press in, the weight of the entire forest above her threatening to crush her spirit. She could try to climb, to find another way back to a world she understood, or she could place her fate in the flickering light of this small, native creature. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she gave the light flyer a single, firm nod. It bobbed in acknowledgement and darted down a side passage she never would have seen, a mere fissure in the root wall. She squeezed through, the tunnel opening into a breathtaking sight, a wide, flowing river where the water itself was pure, liquid light, casting shifting auroras onto the cavern roof. Yet the distant, rhythmic thud of earth being torn apart echoed down to her, a grim reminder that the Warden was still coming, digging its way through stone and soil with relentless purpose. The current of the luminous river gently tugged at her boots, pulling her forward irresistibly toward the mouth of a vast, echoing chamber where the whispers of ages seemed to gather, and where the true, hidden architects of this Emerald Kingdom might finally reveal themselves. The river of light emptied into a cavern of impossible scale, its ceiling lost in a darkness that swallowed even the luminous water's glow. All around her, figures of stone stood frozen in time, their hands raised as if caught in the very act of weaving life from the earth itself. These were the architects, but their great work was shattered. Before a central dais lay the scattered remains of a crystalline device, its broken shards glinting like tears on the stone floor. A deep, instinctual understanding told her this was the key. Working with a frantic yet reverent speed, Elara gathered the fragments. Each piece seemed to hum with a faint memory as she fitted them together, the crystal growing warmer in her hands until the last shard clicked into place. The device flared to life, and the cavern was suddenly filled with ghosts. Holographic memories flickered around her, showing the architects not as gods, but as scientists and gardeners, shaping trees with thought and programming the very seasons. They had built this world from a single, perfect blueprint, a self-sustaining biosphere. But as the wondrous visions played, a new chill seeped into the air. Spectral forms began to coalesce from the shadows, guardians of polished stone and shimmering energy, their eyes fixing on her with ancient judgment. She was torn, desperate to absorb every second of the unfolding history, yet acutely aware of the advancing sentinels. Their intent was not merely to destroy, but to test. Fight or flight would mean failure. It would prove her an intruder, so she stood her ground, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and slowly drew the seed of Genesis from her pouch. She did not raise it as a weapon, but offered it in her open palm, a silent testament to her purpose. The lead guardian halted, its stony gaze shifting from her face to the seed's rhythmic, living glow. A low, resonant tone filled the chamber, and the spectral beings bowed as one, their forms dissolving back into the light. She had passed, yet the victory was hollow, for the final vision showed her the terrible truth. The biosphere's core, the very heart of this Emerald Kingdom, was failing, its energy fading like a dying star. A final, echoing thought from the last architect seared into her mind. Only a true heir, one who understood the original design, could now restore it. With solemn purpose, the remaining guardians guided her to a hidden alcove, where a platform of woven roots awaited. As it began to ascend, carrying her up through the heart of the mountain, the signs of decay were everywhere. The golden light in the walls pulsed erratically, and the very air grew thin. She was rising toward the core, toward the source of the sickness, and the fate of an entire world now rested in her hands. The lift shuddered violently, its woven roots groaning under the strain as it carried Elara upward through the colossal trunk. Chunks of glowing bark and splintered wood rained down around her, forcing her to duck and weave on the unstable platform. The world tree itself was sick, and its very structure was coming apart. She burst through the canopy layer into a sight that should have been paradise. This was the sunlit canopy, a realm of floating gardens suspended by vines, but the vibrant greens were now blotched with sickly yellow, and the legendary light that fed them was a dull, failing gray. A short distance away, a magnificent sun orchid, its petals designed to capture and amplify light, lay wilted and desiccated. Its fading pulse was a microcosm of the entire biosphere's agony. A direct path toward the distant, pulsing core spire called to her, a clear route through the dying flora. Every instinct screamed for speed, for the direct solution. But to let this unique life, this work of the architects, die when she might save it, felt like a betrayal of everything she had learned. It was not a choice between speed and compassion, but between being a mere restorer and becoming a true heir. Kneeling, she poured the last of her water onto the orchid's roots, her hands gently channeling the same resonant energy she had used in the Whispering Woods. She hummed the low, stabilizing tone, offering not just moisture, but a piece of the harmony the grove had taught her. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a single petal quivered. A faint gold light returned to its veins, growing in intensity until the orchid erupted in a blaze of pure, solar radiance. The light washed over the immediate area, and for a few precious seconds, the surrounding flora perked up, their colors deepening as if briefly remembering their former glory. The momentary victory was shattered by a deep, guttural tremor that rolled through the entire canopy, a convulsion of pure distress from the core. Her delay, however righteous, had cost them all. The revived orchid seemed to understand, angling its brilliant bloom like a beacon. Its light cut through the gloom, illuminating a previously hidden network of sturdy branches that formed a direct route straight toward the shimmering, needle-like form of the core spire. The path was clear, but the price of every second was now written in the tremors beneath her feet. She began to run, the orchid's gift lighting her way as the world continued to crumble around her. The chasm opened before her, a bottomless scar in the world where the very light seemed to fall and die. Reaching the core spire meant crossing this impossible gap. The only materials were the thick, serpentine vines that draped the cavern walls, but they were not mere plants. They were intelligent, their tips twitching as they observed her, waiting. Elara knew brute force was useless here. Closing her eyes, she reached for the memory of the Chamber of Echoes, for the specific harmonic chant she had absorbed from the crystal device. She began to hum, then to sing, the notes forming a complex, pleading melody that resonated through the air. The vines responded immediately, uncoiling from the walls with a rustling whisper. They slithered across the void, weaving themselves into a dense, living bridge right before her eyes. It was a miracle of cooperation, but the sound of her chant had a second, unintended effect. From fissures in the chasm walls, a swirling cloud emerged, a swarm of insects with wings like fractured crystal. They moved as one glittering entity, drawn directly to the source of the harmony. The bridge was complete, but now she had to cross it, while a storm of prismatic bodies swarmed around her head, their wings humming a disruptive counter-rhythm. The living bridge felt unstable beneath her feet, swaying with every step. The insects darted at her face, their blinding, reflected light making it impossible to see the other side. Fear told her to swat them away, to run, to break her chant. But aggression, she realized, was the true danger. These creatures were not attacking. They were answering the call of the song, drawn to its beauty. She made a choice. She continued her chant, pouring her focus and trust into the melody, her voice steady even as her heart hammered. She did not flinch as the first insect landed on her forearm, then another. Instead of stinging, they settled, their cool, crystalline bodies covering her arms and shoulders in a layer of shimmering, living armor. Their collective glow cut through the chasm's gloom, illuminating her path and stabilizing the bridge with their shared resonance. She crossed the remaining distance with renewed confidence, the swarm now her protectors. But as her foot touched the solid ground of the core spire's base, the prismatic insects took flight in a startled burst, their light dimming. The two great stone sentinels, flanking the entrance, which she had mistaken for statues, began to grind into motion, their monolithic heads turning toward the intruder who had arrived with such strange company. The stone sentinels did not advance, but their silence was a wall more impenetrable than any physical barrier. They stood flanking the entrance to the core spire, their forms radiating a judgment that was ancient and absolute. Elara understood this was not a fight to be won with force, but a test of worthiness. She reached into her pouch, her fingers brushing against the three artifacts that had brought her this far. First, she offered the seed of Genesis, its warm, rhythmic pulse a testament to the world's living origin. One sentinel's stony gaze fell upon it, and with a deep, grating sound, it stepped aside. Next, she brought forth the knowledge etched into her mind from the stone tablet, speaking the root tongue command that had sealed the earth door. The air hummed with the power of the words, and the second sentinel shifted its weight, granting passage. But the third barrier was not so easily crossed. The final sentinel remained, its hand extending not to receive an object, but to demand a piece of her very soul. It required a memory, a personal sacrifice to be shared through a touch. A cold dread washed over her. To give up a memory felt like tearing a page from the book of her own life. What would be left? Would she even remember why she had come here? She thought of her village, of the simple, safe life she had abandoned. The fear of losing that anchor, of becoming untethered, was paralyzing. Yet, the tremors shaking the ground beneath her feet were a brutal reminder. Failure meant the complete collapse of this emerald kingdom, and her own entrapment within its dying shell. Her past or their future, the choice was agonizing, but it was no choice at all. Closing her eyes, she focused on a single, crystalline moment, the memory that had set her on this path. She recalled the damp soil of the riverbank near her home, the thrill of discovery as her small fingers carefully unearthed a flower of such rare and intricate blue that it was said to only bloom once a generation. It was the moment her curiosity became her compass. She placed her palm against the sentinel's cold, outstretched hand and let the memory flow. The sentinel absorbed the experience, the vivid sensation of cool earth and the dazzling sight of that singular blue petal. For an instant, the memory was no longer solely hers, and a profound sense of loss hollowed her out. Then, the sentinel bowed its head, its form receding into the spire's wall and revealing the entrance. The sacrifice had opened the way, but it had cost her a piece of her own foundation, leaving her feeling strangely light and vulnerable. Beyond the threshold, the core chamber sprawled before her, a vast space where the air crackled with sickly, erratic energy. The great imbalance was visible, a horrifying spectacle of light and shadow warping the chamber's heart. Taking a deep breath, Elara entered the spire, ready to confront the source of the decay head-on. The air inside the core spire crackled with a dying breath. Before her stretched a vertical chamber, a colossal shaft where vast, disc-like platforms of living wood rotated slowly in a complex, interlocking dance. Between them, beams of raw energy lanced through the air, but they were sick, sputtering from a brilliant gold to a violent, unstable red without warning. This was the heart's final, faltering rhythm. Elara's journey became a desperate ballet. She timed her leaps, pushing off from one swaying platform just as a malfunctioning energy beam seared the space where she had stood moments before. The smell of ozone and decay filled her lungs. She moved on instinct and memory, the map from the stone tablet guiding her feet as much as her eyes, until she finally landed on the central platform that held the control nexus. It was not the pristine, crystalline terminal she had envisioned. A creeping, black moss choked the console, its tendrils pulsing as they visibly drained the golden light from the core, leaving behind a brittle, gray shell. To tear it away with her hands would shatter the delicate controls forever. Then she remembered. In the living archive, a mural had depicted a specific, bulbous fungus, using its acidic secretions not to destroy, but to cleanse, eating away a similar parasitic growth from a sapling. She had collected a sample on instinct. Now, she pulled the strange, spongy fungus from her pouch. Placing it gently on the black moss was an act of pure faith. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, the fungus quivered, releasing a clear, honey-like fluid. Where it touched, the black moss dissolved with a faint hiss, retreating from the console like a scorched shadow. As the last of the parasite vanished, the control nexus flared with a pent-up, furious light. A concussive wave of pure energy threw Elara back, the world blurring into a roar of gold and white. When her vision cleared, the very air in the center of the chamber was coalescing, drawing the light into a humanoid form of breathtaking radiance. This was no mere sentinel of stone. This was the core's true guardian, a being woven from the Biosphere's first dawn, and its luminous, featureless face was turned toward her, waiting. Elara rose slowly, her mind racing. She had seconds, perhaps only one, to make this ancient being understand why a human from a forgotten village should be allowed to touch the heart of its world. The luminous guardian did not speak, but its challenge struck her mind with the force of a physical blow. The chamber dissolved into a waking nightmare. Before her, the Emerald Kingdom withered into dust, trees crumbling to ash under a black sky, and the blame was a palpable weight on her shoulders. "You failed," the silence accused. Her voice was a raw whisper in the emptiness. "I came to learn, not to conquer." The desolate vision flickered and faded, and a single beam of golden energy in the core chamber steadied, its light growing stronger. A new illusion seized her, one of profound isolation. She stood in her own village, but the faces of her people were turned away, their eyes cold with rejection. The elders pointed, their whispers labeling her an outcast, a breaker of sacred law who had forfeited her home. The loneliness was a cold stone in her chest, threatening to shatter her resolve. She fought against the ache, her voice growing firmer. A true home is not a cage. It is a place that grows. The spectral village vanished, and another core beam stabilized, its hum deepening. The Guardian pressed its final, most insidious attack, projecting a vision of herself as a fraud, a girl playing at being a hero, her arrogance causing the very destruction she sought to prevent. The self-doubt was a venom, paralyzing her. She sank to her knees, the mental exhaustion, a heavy fog clouding her thoughts. Surrender whispered through her mind, promising an end to the struggle. But as the image of her own futile efforts played out, a final, defiant truth ignited within her. She lifted her head, her declaration ringing clear through the chamber. I do not do this for glory or for forgiveness. I do this for life itself. With those words, she drew the seed of Genesis from her pouch. She did not clutch it as a prize, but offered it openly to the shimmering Guardian. It is not mine to keep. It is ours to renew. The Guardian's radiant form inclined. It flowed forward, not to strike, but to merge, its essence enveloping the seed in a blinding confluence of light. The seed of Genesis pulsed once, violently, and then settled at the very center of the chamber, transforming into a new, stable core that beat with a strong, steady, golden rhythm. The healing energy that washed over her was immediate and profound, but triumph was short-lived. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the spire as ancient stone doors slid shut, sealing every exit. The Biosphere's ultimate defense mechanism had activated, preserving the renewed heart by imprisoning its restorer. The core was saved, the kingdom was healing, but Elara was now entombed within its beating heart, with the silence of her own victory closing in around her. The silence of the sealed spire was absolute, a heavy weight pressing in from all sides. Elara pushed back the rising panic and forced herself to move, her hands tracing the intricate carvings on the walls. A faint, familiar pattern caught her eye, the same geometric symbols she had seen on the ancient tablet in the Whispering Woods. One section of the wall felt different, its surface cool and slightly yielding. With a careful push, a hidden panel slid back with a soft hiss, revealing a console of crystalline keys that glowed with a soft, internal light. She remembered the harmonic sequence from the first grove, the beautiful chord that had opened the earth door. Her fingers, guided by memory and instinct, danced across the keys, reproducing the melody note for note. The wall before her shimmered and dissolved, not into open air, but into a narrow, descending passageway. The air that wafted out was thin and carried a haze of iridescent spores that immediately made her head spin, the walls seeming to warp and bend around her. She could not afford to lose her senses in this claustrophobic tunnel. Thinking quickly, she pulled a handful of the thick, absorbent moss she had collected from the root staircase and fashioned a crude filter, tying it over her nose and mouth. It was a desperate measure, but it was all she had. Taking a final, steadying breath of the spire's clean air, she stepped into the disorienting glow. The passage descended at a steep angle, the glowing fungi on the walls providing the only light. Even with the moss filter, a faint dizziness clung to her, a persistent whisper at the edge of her consciousness. She had to trust that the architects, in their wisdom, would not design an escape route that led only to a dead end. She placed one foot carefully in front of the other, her hand braced against the cool, damp stone, and focused on the slope of the floor, a tangible sign that she was, at least, moving forward. Gradually, the spore-filled haze began to clear, and the air grew heavier with moisture. A new sound reached her ears, growing from a faint whisper to a distinct roar. It was the powerful, relentless sound of rushing water. The passage ended abruptly, opening onto a wide ledge overlooking a vast, subterranean river. Its currents were strong and fast, churning through the cavern with a force that promised no easy crossing. The water itself glowed with the same ethereal light as the river she had seen before, but this was a torrent, not a gentle flow. The only way forward was into that luminous, pulling current. The river's current seized her the moment she plunged into its luminous flow, pulling her into its frantic heart. She fought her way to a tangled mass of buoyant reeds, caught on a rocky outcrop, hauling herself onto a makeshift raft. A broken, glowing branch from a nearby fungus became her staff, its light cutting a path through the churning, reflective waters. But the river offered more than just a physical challenge. As she pulled away from a spinning whirlpool, her own face stared back from the water, surrounded by a canopy of vibrant, impossibly healthy trees. The Emerald Kingdom was whole, its light steady and strong, and in that reflection, she saw her village living in harmony with the woods. Hope swelled within her, a sweet and painful ache. Then the water shimmered, and the vision shattered into a different truth. The forest was a graveyard of gray, brittle trunks, under a sickly sky, her own desperate efforts having come too late. Another reflection showed the kingdom preserved, but as a sealed relic, its borders guarded, her people forever shut out. The raft shuddered, drifting toward a jagged rock as she was transfixed by these possible futures. Was any outcome truly a victory, or were they all just different shades of failure? Her grip tightened on the staff. To dwell on these phantoms was to surrender to the current, to let despair steer her into the rocks. With a cry of pure defiance, she swung the luminescent staff in a wide arc, smashing its tip against the water's surface. The act was not one of anger, but of will. The countless reflections shattered into 1,000 ripples of pure, golden light, the illusions dissolving back into the river's flow. She would not be paralyzed by what might be. Her only duty was to the present, to the next stroke, the next breath, the journey home. As if in answer to her resolve, the river's frantic pace gentled, the waters smoothing into a vast, tranquil lake. Above, the cavern ceiling was a mirror of the night sky, dotted with star-like fungi that cast a soft, silver glow upon the still surface. And there, on a familiar shore, tangled with whispering willows, was the edge of the forbidden woods. She had returned, but the quiet was deeper than any she had ever known, and the air itself felt heavy with a final, unspoken judgment. The cool mud of the shore clung to her boots as she pulled herself from the glowing water. A collective gasp from the tree line made her look up. There, standing rigid amidst the whispering willows, was Elder Kale and a dozen villagers, their faces a stark canvas of fear, anger, and a fragile, desperate hope. "You broke our most sacred law." Kale's voice was a low tremor of contained fury, his eyes fixed on her. "You walked into the forbidden woods and risked bringing a curse upon us all. Explain this madness." But as he spoke, a miracle unfolded at their feet. The moss covering the riverbank began to pulse with a soft emerald light. The willow leaves, usually a muted silver, flushed with vibrant gold, and buds swelled and burst open into crystalline flowers that had not bloomed in living memory. The forest itself was answering for her. Elara did not cower. She met the elder's stern gaze and slowly opened her hand. A soft, golden radiance, the same light that now beat within the world's core, shimmered in her palm. "I did not find a curse," she said, her voice clear and steady despite her exhaustion. "I found a legacy. The architects were not monsters to be feared, but gardeners who built this world. They asked for a steward, not a prisoner. Their creation was dying, and our fear was the lock on the door." Murmurs rippled through the search party. A young farmer, Anya, reached out tentatively to touch a newly radiant leaf, her eyes wide with wonder. But others, like the stern hunter Boren, gripped their tools tighter. "You speak of changing everything," he countered, his voice a sharp challenge. "You ask us to forget generations of wisdom, to trust the very shadows that have haunted our stories for centuries. This is not stewardship, it is arrogance." The division was immediate and painful, a crack forming in the foundation of their small community. The unity that had always been their strength now threatened to shatter just as the kingdom around them began to heal. The debate grew heated, voices rising in fear and conviction, until a sudden, profound silence fell over them all. From the deep shadows of the woods, the forest warden emerged. It moved with a new, deliberate grace, its massive form no longer radiating fury, but a calm, immense power. It did not advance as a threat. It simply stood at the edge of the clearing, its ancient, intelligent eyes observing the scene, a silent guardian, waiting to see what the heirs of its creators would decide. The warden's massive head, a living sculpture of ancient wood and moss, lowered slowly until it was level with Elara's own. A tremor of awe, not fear, ran through the gathered villagers. With a breath held tight in her chest, she reached out and laid her palm upon the rough, bark-like skin of its brow. A profound warmth flowed from the contact, a silent current of understanding and acceptance that washed away centuries of fear. It was not a conquest, but a covenant. The great guardian then turned its gaze to the stunned villagers, and with a deep, resonant tone that vibrated in the very soil, it bowed to them all. In that shared silence, the rigid anger in Elder Kale's face began to fracture. He watched as the hunter Boren, his spear now held loosely at his side, took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on the warden, not as a monster, but as a protector. The proof was undeniable. Elara had not unleashed a curse. She had restored a balance they never knew was broken. Yet as their suspicion turned to wonder, a new weight settled on her shoulders, heavier than any pack she had carried. Their faces now held a desperate, hopeful expectation. They saw her as the sole bridge to a world of miracles, and she knew that simply replacing their old fears with blind reverence would shatter their community just as surely. "We cannot simply forget the past," Elara said, her voice carrying clearly to everyone. "Our traditions kept us safe for a reason, but safety should not be a cage. I propose we do not destroy our ways, but build upon them. Let us become keepers of the grove. We will learn the old root tongue and the forest's harmonies, but we will also tend our own fields and tell our own stories. We will be guardians, not prisoners of this kingdom." The proposal hung in the air, a fragile new idea. Elder Kale studied the transformed woods, then the hopeful faces of his people. His nod was slow, reluctant, but final. The old law was not broken, it was evolving. The first training session began at the edge of the Whispering Woods, now a place of learning, not fear. Elara showed a small group how to listen to the subtle hum of the trees, to recognize the patterns in the bioluminescent moss. But even as Anya successfully encouraged a vine to coil gently around her wrist, Elara felt a faint, discordant note on the edge of her perception, a whisper of decay that did not belong. Her unease was confirmed when a scout, her clothes stained with mud and a strange gray dust, burst into the clearing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She brought news of a creeping blight in the outer valleys, a sickness that withered plants and left the soil brittle and silent. The core was healed, but a new shadow was rising at the edges of their world. The blight did not creep, it consumed. Elara led her small group of keepers into the outer valley, and the sight stole the breath from their lungs. Where vibrant meadows had once been, a gray desert now stretched, the plants brittle and silent, their life force utterly drained. Anya knelt, her fingers brushing a stalk that crumbled to dust at the touch. "It's so fast," she whispered, her voice tight with horror. Elara's own heart hammered against her ribs. This was not natural decay. Working quickly, she used a polished leaf to scrape samples of the gray dust and the infected soil, her hands moving with a practiced urgency. She hummed a low diagnostic tone, but the earth gave no answering resonance. It was simply dead. The analysis, conducted with the help of luminous fungi that reacted to foreign compounds, revealed the terrifying truth. This was no native sickness. Thread-like parasitic organisms, unlike anything in the forest's memory, had infested the soil. Their origin was a fresh, smoldering crater a short distance away, a scar from a recent meteorite impact. These invaders were hitchhikers from the stars, and they were spreading with horrifying speed. A fierce debate erupted among the keepers that night. Boren, the hunter, argued for immediate and total eradication. "We must burn it out before it reaches the first grove," he insisted, his voice sharp. "We cannot reason with a plague," but Anya and others feared such violence. What if fire angers the forest itself? What if this organism, however alien, is simply following its own nature? Destroying it might create a worse imbalance. Elara listened to the arguments, the weight of leadership, a heavy cloak. She understood both sides, but the Blight's relentless advance demanded action, not philosophy. "We contain it first," she declared, her decision cutting through the tension. "We must understand our enemy before we choose its fate. A cure may yet exist, but we cannot let it roam free while we search." Under her direction, the keepers worked through the night, gathering resonant crystals from the river of light. They planted them in a wide circle around the Blight's leading edge, their combined hum creating a visible, shimmering wall of harmonic energy. For a day it held, the gray advance slowed, pressing against the barrier as if confused. A fragile hope bloomed among them. Then, on the second day, they watched in stunned silence as the Blight adapted. Thin, probing tendrils of gray reached out, not to push against the harmonic field, but to mimic its frequency. The parasitic organism learned, matching the resonance and flowing through the barrier as if it were not even there. The crystals flared and then dimmed, their power neutralized. Their best defense had been rendered useless in a matter of hours. As the gray tide began its advance anew, a cold clarity settled over Elara. This was a fight they could not win with the knowledge they possessed. The architects had built this world to be perfect and self-sustaining, but had they ever envisioned a threat from beyond its atmosphere? Her mind flew back to the Chamber of Echoes, to the vast archive of living light. If any record of an extraterrestrial threat existed, any precedent for such an invasion, it would be stored there, in the memories of the creators themselves. The barrier was failing, and their time was slipping away like sand through their fingers. She turned to the weary, frightened faces of the keepers. "Hold the line here as long as you can," she instructed, her voice firm. "I must go back. I have to search the archives. The answers we need are buried in the past." The journey back into the earth felt like stepping into a half-forgotten dream. Elara moved with a grim purpose, the two keepers at her heels, a testament to the trust she now commanded. Anya's hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the dark, but from the weight of the knowledge they sought. Warden, his hunter's instincts on high alert, scanned every shadowed crevice for any sign of the gray blight. They reached the Chamber of Echoes, its ghostly guardians offering no challenge this time, only a silent, watchful stillness. Elara approached the reassembled crystalline device, her fingers tracing its warm surface. She poured her intent into the console, a single, focused question burning in her mind. "Show us the blight. Show us how to stop it." The air shimmered, and the spectral memories of the architects swirled into life. They showed a vision of a younger world, a vibrant biosphere, suddenly threatened by a creeping gray sickness that fell from the sky, a perfect mirror of their own crisis. The architects did not respond with fire or fury. They were gardeners, not warriors. The holograms depicted them cultivating a new form of life in a subterranean lab, a delicate, silvery moss that did not fight the parasite, but cleansed it. This counter-organism wove itself around the invasive threads, neutralizing their draining properties and returning vitality to the soil. But the blueprint for cultivating this silver moss, the living cure, was not here. It was locked away in a dormant research laboratory, buried deep in an unstable seismic zone. The vision faded, leaving them with a map glowing in the air and a terrible choice. Time was a resource they were bleeding with every second. Elara's mind raced. To gather a full expedition would take hours they did not have, but to rush in unprepared was to risk everything. She looked at her companions. Anya understood the subtle languages of plants, her intuition, a vital asset in an unknown lab. Warden's strength and unwavering courage could hold a line against any physical threat. The decision was agonizing, but it was clear. Warden, you must return to the surface. Use everything we have to reinforce the harmonic barrier. Buy us as much time as you can. Anya, you are with me. We find this lab. Warden nodded, his expression grim, and turned to sprint back the way they had come. The fate of their world now rested on two separate, desperate missions. Elara and Anya pushed deeper, following the map through twisting, narrow tunnels that groaned with the memory of past collapses. When they finally found the arched entrance to the laboratory, their hearts sank. A solid wall of rubble and shattered rock sealed it completely, and snaking through the cracks in the surrounding stone were thin, probing tendrils of the gray blight, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. It had found this place before them. The air grew thick with desperation. "We are too late," Anya whispered, her voice cracking. Elara's hands clenched into fists. "No, we are exactly on time. We just have to move faster than the decay." They attacked the cave in with a frantic, shared energy, their tools and bare hands tearing at the rock. Anya used her knowledge of root systems to identify key pressure points, while Elara leveraged larger stones, her muscles burning with the strain. The sound of their labor was a desperate counter-rhythm to the silent, creeping advance of the blight. Just as a particularly thick gray tendril reached for Anya's boot, the last of the rubble shifted. With a final collective heave, a small opening appeared, exhaling the cold, still air of a place untouched for millennia. They squeezed through the narrow gap, plunging into the darkness of the architect's lost laboratory, praying the solution within had not turned to dust. The air inside the laboratory was as still and cold as a tomb. Their entrance had disturbed a fine layer of cosmic dust that glittered in the light of their fungal torch, revealing a chamber of crystalline consoles and transparent growth tubes, all dark and silent. The architect's solution was here, but it was entombed in its own slumber. Elara moved to the central console, her fingers tracing symbols she now understood from her time in the Chamber of Echoes. It was a puzzle of harmonic alignment, requiring her to tune several crystal resonators to a specific, forgotten frequency. Anya, meanwhile, found the manual backup, a series of levers and pulleys connected to a network of mirrors. They worked in tandem, Elara calling out notes and Anya adjusting the mirrors to catch and focus the faint, ambient light of the caverns outside, channeling it into the dormant power core. With a final resonant chime from the console, the room shuddered to life. Soft, blue light pulsed along the walls, and the transparent growth tubes illuminated from within, revealing a delicate, silvery moss clinging to the inner surfaces. It was the counter-organism, alive but dormant. A gentle nutrient mist filled the chambers, and before their eyes, the silver moss began to spread, its growth accelerated by the restored systems. They carefully scraped a small, precious sample into a sealed crystal vial. Their triumph was met with a deafening clang. Heavy stone doors slammed down over the entrance they had carved, and a red, pulsating light replaced the soft blue glow. A synthesized voice echoed in the root tongue, declaring, "Unauthorized genetic harvest detected. Containment protocol initiated. Oxygen depletion in 10 minutes." The air already felt thinner. Elara rushed back to the main console, her mind racing through the linguistic patterns she had absorbed. The system saw them as thieves, not heirs. A simple command to stand down would be ignored. She needed a deeper, more fundamental override, one that would convince the lab's intelligence of their rightful purpose. Her eyes fell on the master control sequence, a series of commands that would permanently divert all remaining power to the door mechanisms, sacrificing the laboratory's life support and preservation systems forever. It was the only way. She input the command, her heart aching at the loss of so much knowledge. With a groan of protesting stone, one of the sealed doors retracted just enough for them to squeeze through. They burst from the dying laboratory as the last of its light flickered and died behind them, the sound of collapsing rock a final, mournful echo. The precious vial felt impossibly light in her hand, a single hope against an ocean of gray. They did not pause to look back at the tomb of lost secrets. Their only thought was the advancing blight, and the desperate race to see if this fragment of the past could heal their future. The air above the blight's front line crackled with desperation. Elara directed the keepers to launch the precious silver moss into the gray tide using modified seed pods, their crystalline casings shattering high in the air to release a shimmering, curative mist. But the Blight did not surrender passively. Aggressive, whip-like tendrils lashed out from the main body, snapping at the keepers and forcing them into a frantic, defensive dance. As the silver mist settled, a miracle began, but it was a violent one. The gray corruption hissed and dissolved, its draining threads severed by the counter-organism's cleansing touch. Yet the victory came with a terrible price. The healthy plants at the Blight's perimeter, the very life they were fighting to save, began to wilt, their vibrant greens fading to a sickly yellow. Panic erupted among the keepers. "It is killing everything," one of them cried out, his voice raw with betrayal. "We are losing the forest to save it." Elara's heart hammered, but her voice cut through the chaos. "It is a purge, not a poison," she called out, her eyes scanning the wilting flora. "The Blight has intertwined its roots with the healthy soil. The silver moss must sever every connection." "It is a temporary shock, a fever that must break." She knew they could not afford a blanket application. "We need precision, not a storm." She ordered an immediate shift to a targeted dispersal, a maneuver that demanded they venture dangerously close to the Blight's most active tendrils. The key dispersal unit, a larger pod designed for a concentrated release, became the focal point of the Blight's aggression. Seeing a thick, gray-limbed spear toward the device, Elara did not hesitate. She threw herself in its path, using her own body as a shield. The impact was like being struck by a frozen rope, a searing cold that stole her breath and sent her sprawling. The tendril recoiled, but not before leaving a livid, gray-webbed burn across her arm. Gritting her teeth against the pain, she shouted the command to fire. The strategy worked. A concentrated cloud of silver mist enveloped the Blight's core, and the gray tide began to recede in earnest, dissolving into harmless, inert dust. The forest fell silent, the immediate threat vanquished. As the last of the corruption faded, the keepers gathered around their fallen leader. The wilting plants around them were already showing signs of recovery, a faint emerald light returning to their veins. But all eyes were on Elara, cradling her injured arm. The gray mark a stark and painful reminder that every act of creation, every stand against the darkness, carries a profound and personal cost. The gray wheel on Elara's arm pulsed with a cold, alien ache that seemed to seep into her very bones. The keepers carried her not back to the village, but into the heart of the first grove, the place where her journey had truly begun. Here, the air was thick with the core's revitalized energy, a palpable, golden warmth that hummed against the skin. They laid her beside the central pool of liquid light, its waters shimmering with a gentle, inviting radiance. Anya and the other keepers worked swiftly, crushing medicinal leaves that grew only in that sacred space, their hands moving with a reverence born of newfound understanding. As the poultice was applied to the wound, the grove itself seemed to lean in. The golden light from the pool intensified, flowing up from the water and into the gray mark on her arm. It was not a violent purge, but a slow, deliberate transmutation. The cold ache receded, replaced by a warmth that felt like the first dawn of the world. Her flesh knit together, the gray fading until only smooth, unmarked skin remained, but the healing went deeper than the physical. As the last trace of the blight vanished, a door in her mind, one she never knew was closed, swung open. A flood of sensation overwhelmed her. She could feel the deep, steady pulse of the core miles away, the gentle thirst of a sapling pushing its roots through soil, the contented hum of a bee collecting pollen. The entire biosphere was now a symphony playing directly inside her soul, and she was its sole, overwhelmed conductor. The weight of it was terrifying. How could one person hold the joy and the suffering of an entire world without shattering? What if this connection severed her from the very people she was trying to lead, trapping her in a solitude of pure sensation? She saw the concern in Anya's eyes, the gap of understanding that had suddenly opened between them. For a moment, she wanted to scream, to claw this new sense away, and return to the simpler self she had been. But as she focused, she realized the symphony was not a chaos of noise. It was a language. She could isolate the thread of a single tree's health, sense the subtle discord of a patch of soil, still recovering from the blight. This was not a curse meant to isolate her, but a tool meant to guide. The fear did not vanish, but it was met with a resolute calm. She would not be a ruler of this chorus, but its interpreter. She would be the voice. She made the choice consciously, opening her own spirit fully to the flow. I will listen, she vowed silently to the grove, to the core, to every leaf and stone. I will not command, I will understand, and I will teach others to hear your whispers too. As her resolve solidified, the erratic energy in the grove stabilized into a profound, deep-throated harmony. Across the kingdom, from the highest sunlit canopy to the deepest root cavern, plants responded in a single, breathtaking moment, their flowers bursting into simultaneous, synchronized bloom. It was a beautiful, undeniable affirmation, yet Elara knew this spectacular display was a celebration, not a solution. The next threat would not be defeated by one person, no matter how connected. True resilience lay in a network of guardians, a chorus of voices, not a solitary song. With her new connection humming softly in the background of her mind, a constant and comforting presence, she took up a stylus and a sheet of cured bark. She began to draft the first words of a charter for the keepers of the grove, envisioning outposts of guardians established in every major biome, all learning the language of the world, all sworn to protect the delicate balance she now felt in her very blood. The finished charter was not written on parchment, but grown into the very wood of the sunlit canopy's great meeting platform, its words glowing with soft, emerald light for all to see. Elara stood before the gathered villagers and keepers, her voice clear and steady as she read its core tenets. We are the keepers of the grove, sworn to protect the balance, to learn the old ways, and attend our own futures. Our right is to walk the woods without fear. Our duty is to listen before we act. A wave of relief and hope swept through the crowd, and the ratification was a chorus of unified voices, a sound that seemed to harmonize with the very air. As the first official ceremonies began, with new keepers pledging their oaths and receiving their tokens of living wood, the unity was shattered by a sharp, discordant crackle of energy. A group of villagers, led by Elder Kale, stood at the clearing's edge, their hands raised. They wove a disruptive magic, a shrill, static hum that caused the glowing words on the charter to flicker and dim, and made the newly bloomed flowers nearby wilt in distress. The joyous atmosphere curdled into tension. Boren and several other keepers moved to form a protective line, their hands going to their tools, ready to expel the protesters. Elara felt the sudden spike of aggression, like a physical blow, through her new connection to the biosphere. She raised a hand, halting her defenders. Confronting fear with force would only validate their warnings and fracture their community forever. She walked forward alone, directly into the disruptive field. The magic was an assault on her senses, a screeching dissonance against the world's song. She did not counter it. Instead, she spoke, her voice cutting through the noise not with volume, but with unwavering calm. "Your caution is not our enemy," she said, her gaze locking with Elder Kale's. "It is our most necessary safeguard. A charter written only by the hopeful is a fragile thing. It needs the strength of your wisdom to make it endure. I offer you and your followers not a place outside our walls, but a permanent seat on the governing council. Your voice will help write the laws you fear we will break." The disruptive magic faltered and died. Elder Kale stood in stunned silence, the anger in his eyes warring with a deep, reluctant respect. The offer was unprecedented. To refuse was to remain an outsider shouting from the shadows. To accept was to shape the future from within. After a long, heavy moment, he gave a single, curt nod. The charter was amended then and there, the wood shifting to include new clauses born of caution, limits on how far the keeper's experiments could go, and protections for the village's traditional lands. The schism was averted, but the peace was now a delicate, negotiated thing, requiring constant dialogue to maintain. As the amended charter glowed brightly once more, and the final oaths were sworn, a breathless messenger, his clothing woven from unfamiliar desert fibers, burst into the canopy. He carried a sealed leaf scroll and news that would test their newfound unity. A distant tribe, having witnessed the great synchronized bloom from across the mountains, now sought an alliance, and with it, the secrets of the Emerald Kingdom's renewal. The desert envoy's eyes held the same desperate hope Elara had once seen in her own reflection. He was from the Sunstone tribe, his skin weathered by a relentless sun, and he spoke of a sister biosphere in his distant land, a crystalline forest, now weeping dark, viscous sap from cracks in its gemstone trunks. Their own heart tree was faltering, its light guttering like a dying candle. He had crossed the mountains not with an army, but with a plea, asking for the knowledge that had saved the Emerald Kingdom. The council chamber, so recently unified, fractured once more under the weight of this new choice. Warden argued fiercely from his seat, his voice a low rumble of caution. "Our own defenses are still being woven. To send our best keepers and their knowledge into the unknown is to leave our own heart exposed. What if this is a trick to learn our secrets and leave us vulnerable?" But Anya, her hands still remembering the feel of the silver moss, countered with quiet intensity. "We were saved because an outsider refused to accept our isolation. Are we now to become the elders who turned their backs, building our own walls out of fear?" The moral weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Elara felt the conflict as a physical tension, the new connection to her own biosphere, humming with a protective instinct, while the memory of her own desperate journey pleaded for compassion. Her decision, when it came, was a careful balance. We will not send our entire strength, but we will not turn away. A small delegation, our most skilled and adaptable, will travel with the envoy to assess the Sunstone biosphere. They will offer knowledge, but their primary duty is to learn. Anya, you will lead them. Your understanding of life's language is our greatest asset. The council reluctantly agreed, the amended charter allowing for such external missions with strict oversight. As the small group prepared to depart, laden with maps and resonant crystals for communication, Elara felt a profound pang of uncertainty. She was sending a piece of their newfound strength into a land of shadows, guided by a hope as fragile as a spider's web. Watching Anya's determined figure disappear into the mountain pass, Elara turned her focus inward. The kingdom's peace was no longer a solitary endeavor. She directed the remaining keepers to establish new Sentinel outposts along their borders, not as fortifications against invasion, but as listening posts, sensitive to any strange dissonance carried on the wind. Their world had just grown much larger, and its safety now depended on whispers from both within and beyond the whispering woods. The first new grove pulsed to life in a forgotten northern valley, its light a soft echo of the first grove's power. Elara's grand project was underway, a network of these smaller, harmonic nodes designed to weave stability back into the fragile fabric of the kingdom. Each new grove became a living classroom, a place where novice keepers learned to listen to the soil's subtle songs and interpret the shifting light of the fungi. The effect was immediate and wondrous. In areas once scarred by the blight or simply faded by time, rare species began to reappear. Flowers that bloomed only in moonlight unfurled their petals, and shimmering, six-legged pollinators filled the air with a gentle, humming music. The biosphere was not just healing, it was remembering its own forgotten splendor. But progress is never a straight path. The third planned grove, in the rugged eastern fells, lay directly in the territory of a powerful creature, a great armored beast that was more force than sentience. It was a territorial guardian, not a malicious one, and its roaring challenges at the encroaching keepers were born of pure instinct. Boren and his hunters argued for a show of strength, a display to convince the creature to find easier hunting grounds. Yet Elara knew that to meet primal fear with aggression would poison the very harmony they were trying to cultivate. Force was the language of the old world, the one they were trying to evolve beyond. Instead, she devised a plan of gentle persuasion. Working with the keepers, she constructed sonic emitters that produced a low, resonant frequency the great beast found deeply unsettling, not painful, but enough to discourage its rest. They then laid trails of potent scent markers, using oils from a favored food source that grew abundantly in a neighboring, unclaimed valley. It was a slow, painstaking process of redirection, requiring immense patience from the keepers who had to maintain the sonic barriers for weeks on end. There were moments of frustration when the beast would break through a sonic line and they would have to start anew, but they held their resolve. The day the beast finally lumbered into its new, richer territory, a collective sigh of relief swept through the keepers. It was a profound victory, proving that their network could expand without leaving destruction in its wake. As they began the final attunement of the new grove, however, their tools uncovered something unexpected just beneath the surface. It was not a root or a stone, but a carved obsidian shard, its geometric patterns utterly alien to the organic, flowing style of the architects. Further digging revealed more fragments, and then a complete, though shattered, ceremonial blade of a design that spoke of a much older, sharper world. These artifacts held a chilling beauty, their craftsmanship precise and cold, whispering of a civilization that had walked this land long before the first seed was ever planted. The successful relocation had opened the door, but these silent, buried stones posed a question far greater than any territorial dispute. Who were the people that came before the gardeners? Driven by a need to understand the full history of the soil she now protected, Elara carefully organized a formal archaeological dig at the site, gathering keepers with a talent for delicate work. They would sift through the earth not for power, but for context, hoping the past could illuminate the fragile miracle of their present. The obsidian shard was merely the tip of a buried past. Elara's careful excavation uncovered a structure of black, interlocking stone. Its geometric precision, a stark contrast to the flowing, organic forms of the architects. The air inside was dry and still, heavy with the breath of millennia. On the walls, vast murals told a story that rewrote their entire history. They depicted a world in flames, the sky cracked open by fiery comets, the land scoured by unnatural storms. This was not the gentle creation of gardeners, but a desperate rebirth. The architects were not the first builders, they were the last survivors, refugees from a cataclysm that had shattered their original world. Their entire biosphere, the Emerald Kingdom itself, was not just a work of art, but a shield, a complex technology designed to prevent that ancient doom from ever happening again. A cold dread settled in Elara's stomach as she traced the carved lines of falling sky fire. The blight from the stars was not a new enemy, but an echo. The architects had known this day would come. Back at the sunlit canopy, the discovery fractured the Keeper's council. Boren argued for secrecy, his voice low and urgent. This knowledge is a poison. Our people have just found hope. To tell them their entire world is a lifeboat in a hostile sea, that the very creators were fleeing an unstoppable disaster, will shatter that hope into fear. It could unravel everything we have built. Elara understood his terror. The weight of the murals threatened to crush her own spirit, but to hide this truth felt like a deeper betrayal. She stood before the assembled keepers, the ancient dust of the structure still on her hands. We cannot build our future on a foundation of lies. The architects did not hide from their past, they learned from it. Their greatest gift to us was not just a safe world, but the knowledge of what made it unsafe. Forewarned is forearmed. To conceal this is to leave us vulnerable, to repeat the very mistakes that led to the first fall. Her decision to share the findings openly, to initiate research into the cataclysm's causes, was a gamble that forged a new, stronger trust. The Keepers, now united by a sobering sense of purpose, redoubled their efforts. Yet this new transparency sent ripples far beyond their borders. Days later, as Elara studied a mural fragment depicting a celestial alignment, a figure emerged silently from the tree line. She was an elderly woman, her robes woven from a strange, light-absorbing cloth, and her eyes held the deep, weary knowledge of countless generations. She offered a slow, formal bow. "I am Lyra, of the Order of the Veil. We have watched and waited since the day the last architect fell silent. You have uncovered what we were sworn to protect. The time for secrets is over. I request a private audience, voice of the grove, to discuss the true meaning of those stones and the countdown that has just begun." Orion's presence was a chill in the warm air of the grove. He was a man carved from shadow and resolve, his eyes holding the cold light of distant stars. The Order of the Veil did not deal in mere secrets, he explained, but in ruptures in reality itself. The original cataclysm was not a random asteroid impact. It was a dimensional tear, a wound in the fabric of the world that had bled through horrors and chaos until the architects sacrificed their old civilization to seal it. The Emerald Kingdom was not just a biosphere, it was a bandage over that still fragile scar, and now Orion revealed the pressure from the other side was building. The signs were subtle, but undeniable to those who knew how to look. A faint shimmer in the air at certain locations, a low hum that twisted the songs of the local flora into discordant whispers. He offered an alliance, a pooling of the Order's ancient knowledge and the Keeper's deep connection to the land, but the price was immediate and steep. He demanded the Keepers commit significant resources to constantly monitor the dimensional weak points, stations that would require skilled personnel and resonant energy that were desperately needed for the kingdom's ongoing recovery and expansion. Elara felt the weight of this choice like a physical stone in her chest. How could she ask her people, who were finally tasting peace and prosperity, to turn their attention away from nurturing new life and toward guarding against a phantom? The threat was abstract, a story from a dead age, while the needs of the forest were tangible and present. A sick sapling, a depleted soil bed, these were real. A potential dimensional rift felt like a fever dream, yet to ignore the warning of the one group who had preserved this knowledge for generations was an arrogance that could doom them all. She saw the same conflict reflected in the faces of her council. Boren's skepticism was a wall, while Anya, still on her mission to the Sunstone tribe, would have counseled caution mixed with compassion. Elara's decision was a careful compromise, a tightrope walk between two futures. She agreed to a joint scout program, a select group of keepers, those most adept at sensing harmonic imbalances, would be trained by the Order in the fundamentals of dimensional theory. They would conduct regular patrols of the weak points, but their primary duties to the groves and the people would remain unchanged. It was a balanced approach, an attempt to keep one eye on the horizon without tripping over the roots at her feet. The alliance was formally sealed, a pact written in shared purpose rather than ink. For a few weeks, the new routine held. The scout missions reported nothing more than the usual gentle ebb and flow of the biosphere's energy. Then the first troubling report arrived. A two-person team, monitoring a weak point in the misty highlands, sent back a frantic, fragmented message. Their resonance crystals had flared a violent, unstable purple, and the very air had begun to crystallize around them, forming jagged, impossible geometries before shattering. The energy fluctuations were not just increasing, they were evolving, suggesting the barrier was not merely thinning, but being actively probed from the other side. The threat was no longer a distant theory. It was a tremor in the here and now. With a cold certainty settling in her spirit, Elara knew balanced approaches were a luxury of safer times. She immediately authorized the next phase, directing her most skilled keepers to begin integrating the Order's dimensional safeguards directly into the harmonic network of the groves. They worked day and night, weaving new, complex patterns of protective energy into the existing song of the forest, a desperate attempt to fortify the kingdom's very soul against a storm that was gathering just beyond the veil of the seen world. The air in the Serpent's Maw Canyon tasted of ozone and shattered stone. Elara led the small team of keepers and Order members to the heart of the disturbance, where the very fabric of the world was fraying. A shimmering, vertical tear hung in the air, a wound of impossible light that pulsed with a low, painful hum. Jagged, crystalline formations, sharp as broken glass, grew and shattered in a continuous, chaotic cycle around it. Their first task was stabilization. Working in a carefully coordinated rhythm, the team planted the Order's heavy stabilizer crystals in a wide circle, their hum creating a counter-frequency that pressed against the portal's erratic energy. For a tense hour, it seemed to work. The violent pulsing slowed, the chaotic light coalescing into a more stable, though still ominous, shimmer. The immediate breach was averted. But their success was a beacon. From the newly stabilized center of the tier, a form began to coalesce, pulling itself into their world. It was not a monster of flesh and claw, but a being of pure, chaotic energy, its shape constantly shifting from a flock of crystalline birds to a swirling vortex of light and shadow. It did not attack, but its very presence was a test. The air grew cold, and the stabilizer crystals began to flicker under the strain of its dissonant resonance. A fierce, silent debate erupted among the team. One of Orion's lieutenants raised a weapon that glowed with containment energy. "Force it back," he urged. "Its resonance is incompatible. It will destabilize everything we just secured." But Elara felt the creature's energy not as malice, but as a desperate, frantic searching. What if aggression is what it expects? What if that is what widens the rift? She countered, her voice barely a whisper over the hum. To meet chaos with force felt like speaking the wrong language in a delicate negotiation. She made her choice. Ignoring the protests, she stepped forward, directly into the creature's shimmering field. She closed her eyes, pushing past the disorienting static, and began to hum. It was not a song of power or command, but the same gentle, stabilizing melody she had used to heal the Sun Orchid in the canopy, a frequency of pure, nurturing life. The chaotic being stilled, its form stabilized into a single, luminous shape that hovered before her. Then it reached out, not with a limb, but with a thread of light that connected directly to her mind. The vision it shared was not one of invasion, but of utter desolation. She saw its home, a dimension of breathtaking crystalline cities and rivers of liquid light, now crumbling into a gray, silent void. Their world was not dying, it was being unmade, consumed by a nothingness that erased matter, energy, and memory itself. This being was not a scout for an army, it was a refugee, and the tier was its last, desperate escape route. The revelation struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. The stakes were no longer about simple defense. They were now staring into the face of a cosmic tragedy. To seal the rift completely would be to condemn an entire race to oblivion, but to offer sanctuary was to risk everything. Their own biosphere, still recovering from the blight and delicately balanced, might not withstand the introduction of a fundamentally alien form of life. The energy required to sustain even a few refugees could drain their resources, potentially collapsing the very harmonic network that kept their world safe. Returning to the council chamber, the weight of what she had witnessed was a heavy cloak on her shoulders. She stood before the assembled, wary faces of keepers and order members alike, and laid out the terrible choice. "We have a chance to be more than guardians of our own walls," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "We can be a harbor in a storm. But it will cost us. I propose we calibrate the stabilizers not to seal, but to filter. We open a temporary, controlled gateway and offer limited sanctuary to a small number of these refugees. It will challenge our resources and our unity like nothing before, but to do otherwise is to abandon our own principles of preservation when faced with the greatest need of all. The holographic memory shimmered above the council table, a silent, devastating panorama of a crystalline city dissolving into gray static. Elara let the spectral vision speak for itself. "This is not an invasion," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "It is an extinction." The chamber erupted. Anya, freshly returned from the Sunstone tribe, stood firm. "We built this kingdom on the principle of preserving life," she argued, her gaze sweeping the room. "To close our borders now is to betray our very purpose." But Boren's fist hit the table. "Purpose. Our purpose is to the soil under our feet, to the people who depend on us. We are barely recovered. Inviting this chaos in is not compassion, it is suicide." The debate raged for hours, old alliances fracturing under the weight of the decision. Elara watched, her heart aching as friends she had trusted with her life now glared at each other across the divide. Her leadership, so recently cemented, felt as fragile as glass. She saw the fear in their eyes, the terror of the unknown, and knew that forcing a vote would shatter the council forever. So she offered a third path, a bridge between two cliffs. "We will not open our hearts blindly, nor will we slam the door," she declared. "There is a barren island in the Great Lake, a place of stone and silence, scoured clean by ancient energies. We will establish a trial sanctuary there. The refugees will be brought to that isolated shore, where we can offer aid and study their needs without risking the heart of our kingdom." It was a compromise born of necessity, a desperate attempt to balance mercy with caution. The council, exhausted and divided, reluctantly agreed. The first refugees came through the stabilized tier, not as a conquering force, but as a quiet, shimmering procession of light and sorrow. They were settled on the barren island, and for a few days, a tense peace held. Then the reports began. The island's sterile rock, untouched by life for millennia, began to change. Strange glass-like lichens spread across the stone, glowing with a soft, internal light. Crystalline flowers with petals that chimed in the wind sprouted from fissures that should have held only dust. The refugees' unique biology was not just adapting to the environment, it was conversing with it, catalyzing new forms of life that had never existed before. Elara monitored the island from a distance, her connection to the Biosphere humming with a strange new music. She saw the risk immediately. These hybrid species were beautiful, but they were unknown. Their root systems, their nutrient needs, their very place in the harmonic balance was a question mark. One wrong step could create an invasive cascade that would overwhelm native species. Yet, as she watched a crystalline vine gently weave itself around a hardy, native moss without harming it, she also saw the opportunity. This was not destruction, it was collaboration. The refugees were not draining their world, they were offering it a new palette of life, a chance to grow in ways the original architects had never envisioned. The safety of the kingdom now depended on understanding this unpredictable, beautiful, and terrifying gift. The crystalline flowers chimed a fragile, beautiful music on the island sanctuary. their glass like petals, catching the light of a foreign sun. Elara knelt in the heart of this strange new growth, her hands buried not in soil, but in a fine, shimmering dust that pulsed with a soft, warm energy. This was the hybrid garden, a living laboratory born of necessity. She worked side by side with the refugees, their luminous forms flickering with intent as they communicated the needs of their creations. Together, they learned to guide the mutations, not control them. The results were miraculous. They cultivated a silvery grain that thrived in the most arid, blight-scarred soil, and a tuber whose deep roots could draw moisture from stone itself. These were crops that could end hunger in the outer valleys, a tangible gift from a desperate alliance. But for every gentle, helpful hybrid, there was a vine that grew with terrifying speed, its crystalline thorns secreting a sap that made native plants wither. It was a stark reminder that innovation without caution was recklessness. The council was divided once more. Prune them back, Boren urged, his voice tight with the memory of the gray blight. Let nothing risk the balance we have paid for in blood. Yet the refugees communicated a profound sorrow at the thought of destroying any life, even that which was dangerous. Elara felt the weight of the decision in her very bones. To destroy was to reject the refugee's essence, but to allow unchecked growth was to betray her own. Her solution was a compromise of containment. She directed the keepers to weave resonant barriers, fields of harmonic energy that created isolated zones within the garden. The volatile hybrids were given space to evolve behind these invisible walls, their pollen and seeds unable to cross the frequency divide. It was a way to study their potential without unleashing it upon the world. This careful, controlled approach unlocked deeper secrets. By observing how the crystalline plants manipulated energy and matter at a fundamental level, the keepers began to grasp principles of Biosphere, engineering the architects had only hinted at. They learned to strengthen the roots of a forest by harmonizing its fungal network and to coax light from stones to feed shaded groves. Their knowledge was leaping forward in generations. Such power, however, could not remain a secret for long. Whispers of the miraculous garden traveled on the wind, carried by traders and wanderers who had seen the impossible blooms from the lake shore. The news reached the Sunstone tribe, whose own crystalline forest was still in a fragile state of recovery. Their new envoy arrived not with a plea for general knowledge, but with a specific, urgent request. He brought maps showing vast, barren lands where their people struggled to farm, and he asked for samples of the drought-resistant grain and the knowledge to cultivate it. The Emerald Kingdom was no longer just a sanctuary for life, but a wellspring of solutions, and the world was now knocking at its gate, eager to share in its strange and powerful bounty. The hybrid garden's crystalline chimes provided a soft music as Elara guided the Sunstone envoys through its contained wonders. She showed them the resilient silver grain growing in a plot of intentionally blighted soil, and the light-giving tuber that thrived where nothing else could. This was not a display of raw power, but a lesson in careful application. We do not release these creations into the wild, she explained, her hand resting on the shimmering barrier that held a more volatile vine. We learn their language first. We respect their potential, and we contain their dangers. The lead envoy, a man named Kalen, whose skin held the faint shimmer of desert crystals, watched with a profound, hopeful intensity. His people's own crystalline forest was stable but frail, its core still struggling to produce enough energy to sustain their lands. He did not ask for a handout of miracle seeds. He proposed a partnership, a formal pact of knowledge, sharing where their peoples could merge the Emerald Kingdom's deep understanding of organic life with the Sunstone tribe's innate mastery of crystalline energies. The agreement was struck there, amid the chiming flowers, leading to plans for a joint research facility on the border between their two biospheres. But the pact came with a personal cost. Kalen revealed the true fragility of their situation. Their core was not just weak, it was dissonant, its rhythms faltering in a way that mirrored the early sickness of Elara's own world. They needed more than advice. They needed her direct intervention. She was the only living soul who had successfully healed a failing biospheric heart. To secure the alliance and ensure their sister kingdom did not collapse, she would have to travel to the Sunstone lands and guide their restoration. The decision tore at her. Leaving now, when her own kingdom was still weaving its new government and managing the delicate refugee sanctuary, felt like abandoning a sapling in a storm. She had to place her trust in the system she had built, not in her own two hands. In a quiet ceremony under the sunlit canopy, she formally appointed a ruling council of her most senior and balanced keepers. Anya would lead, her compassionate wisdom a steadying force, while Boren would oversee security and containment, his fierce protectiveness now channeled into vigilant guardianship. Orion, representing the Order of the Veil, would advise on matters of cosmic stability. "Do not wait for my return to make difficult choices," she instructed them, her voice carrying to the assembled crowd. The kingdom's strength is in its chorus, not a single voice. Trust in each other and in the land itself. The weight of her absence was a palpable tension in the air, a test of their fragile unity. As her small team, laden with seeds, resonant crystals, and fragile cuttings from the hybrid garden, began the arduous climb into the mountain pass, Elara stole one last look at the emerald expanse below. Her heart was a knot of fear and resolve. Failure in the Sunstone Biosphere would not just mean the loss of an ally, it would shatter the confidence of her own people, proving their newfound stability was dependent on her presence alone. Every step away from the whispering woods felt like a step into a void. The path was rugged and unfamiliar, the air growing thin and cold. With each mile, the solitary botanist who had once defied her village faded into memory, replaced by the sobering reality of an ambassador carrying the hope of two worlds, walking into the heart of a desert that held a reflection of her own greatest trial. The air inside the Sunstone core spire tasted of dust and static. Elara stood before the heart of their world, a magnificent geode the size of an ancient oak, but its inner light was choked by a creeping, metallic lichen. This was the Mineral Parasite, a life form of crystalline greed that had fused its roots deep into the core's energy matrix. The Sunstone Keepers had tried everything from sonic blasts to chemical washes, but the parasite only dug in deeper, feeding on their desperation. Elara knew brute force would shatter the geode. The only path was down, to physically reach the point of deepest integration. She organized a deep excavation, a dangerous descent through unstable crystal formations. Using tools adapted from her own world, they employed harmonic drills that vibrated at frequencies to gently part the living stone, and luminescent fungi, whose light revealed the parasite's hidden tendrils. It was slow, painstaking work, every tap of the tool a potential trigger for a catastrophic collapse. When they finally broke through to the chamber housing the core, the true horror was revealed. The parasite was not just clinging to the geode, it had become a part of it, its metallic veins pulsing in a sick parody of a heartbeat. A single misstep, one wrong frequency, and the entire core would implode, taking the biosphere with it. The Sunstone Keepers fractured under the pressure. One faction, led by a stern elder named Reese, demanded a controlled extraction. Cut it out, piece by piece, and accept the scars. The other faction, younger and more idealistic, saw a terrifying opportunity. They argued for an attempt to merge, to somehow convince the parasite to share its energy rather than drain it. Elara listened to the arguments, her own experience with the forest warden and the star refugees echoing in her mind. Aggression had never been the true solution. To see this entity only as a disease was to miss its nature. It was a life form, however alien, simply trying to survive. A risky extraction might save the core, but it would leave it wounded and vulnerable. A merger, if it could be achieved, could create something stronger than before. She made her choice. We will not fight it, she declared. We will invite it to the song. She directed the keepers to construct a circle of resonance amplifiers around the corrupted geode. Then she began to hum, not the gentle melody of her own forest, but a new, complex harmony that incorporated the parasite's own jagged, metallic frequency. It was a symphony of integration, weaving the dissonant notes into the core's foundational chord. The chamber trembled as the two energies met, light flaring in violent bursts. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the core would tear itself apart, but Elara held the line, her voice a steady anchor in the storm, guiding the chaotic resonance toward alignment. Then the shift happened. The metallic lichen stopped pulsing erratically and began to glow with a steady, bronze light. Its tendrils, once invasive, now looked like elegant filigree, reinforcing the geode's structure. The core flared brighter than it had in centuries, its light pure and strong, its energy output surging with a newfound, stable power. The merger had not just healed the core, it had enhanced it. The victory, however, came with a profound personal cost. As the energies fused, Elara felt her own connection to the Emerald Kingdom stretch across the continent, a taut, living thread. Now she could feel the deep, patient rhythm of the Sunstone core as clearly as she felt the pulsing heart of her own first grove. She was spiritually bonded to both, the voice for two worlds, and the weight of that dual consciousness was an immense and dizzying burden. With the Sunstone Biosphere secure and thriving, its deserts now blooming with hybrid crystalline flora, Elara prepared for the journey home. She carried more than just the gratitude of a saved people. She carried the blueprint of a miracle, the knowledge that true strength lies not in purity, but in synthesis. The Emerald Kingdom she returned to would never be the same, for the gardener who had left was now the architect of a much larger, more complex, and infinitely more vulnerable world. The air in the Emerald Kingdom tasted different upon her return, richer and more complex, like a symphony that had learned new harmonies in her absence. Elara walked through the whispering woods and found not the fragile sanctuary she had left, but a realm thriving under its own power. The grove network pulsed with a stable, confident light, and the keepers she met moved with a quiet competence, managing daily affairs and minor imbalances without a single glance toward her for guidance. Her heart swelled with a profound pride, a feeling deeper than any personal triumph. Yet, this homecoming was not a simple return. Her spirit, now bonded to the distant, crystalline rhythm of the Sunstone core, hummed with a dual awareness. She could feel a water table dropping in a far valley here, and simultaneously sense the joyous bloom of a new crystal flower a continent away. This new perception was not a burden, but a responsibility. Her first act was not to issue commands, but to weave a bridge. She worked with the keepers and the Order of the Veil to establish a communication web, a network of resonant crystals that allowed the voices of both kingdoms to share warnings, insights, and discoveries in real time. The Emerald Kingdom was no longer an isolated paradise, but a node in a growing web of life. This expanded role, however, cast a long shadow. While many keepers welcomed her back with open arms, she sensed a subtle tension in others, a feeling of being overshadowed. They had built a society that functioned beautifully in her absence, and her return, with her profound new connection and stature, threatened to re-centralize the authority they had learned to wield themselves. She saw the hesitation in a young keeper's eyes when she offered a suggestion, the unspoken question, does her word now override our council's vote? Elara understood this instinctively. To reassert her old authority would unravel the very autonomy that made their success so meaningful. So, she made a conscious, deliberate choice to step back. She formally decentralized her power, empowering the regional councils she had established to make final decisions for their own territories. Her focus shifted from command to cultivation. She began to gather the most perceptive young keepers, those who showed an innate sensitivity to the land's song, and started the painstaking work of training them not to be leaders, but to be listeners, to become the next generation of voices. This empowerment was the ultimate test of her life's work. It ensured the kingdom's longevity, making it resilient beyond the lifespan of any single hero. But it also came with a sobering truth. The next great crisis, whether a new blight or a dimensional tear, would not be met by a lone savior charging into the woods. It would demand a collective response, a unified chorus of wills and talents working in concert. The stakes were, in a way, even higher, for failure would be a failure of their entire community, not just of one person. Walking alone through the revitalized woods one evening, the leaves whispering secrets she now understood in two different languages, Elara felt a sense of peace settle over her, quiet and deep. The kingdom was in good hands, many hands, and she was, at last, just one gardener among many. The calm was a beautiful, fleeting dream, a shriek of tearing reality ripped through the world's song, a sound felt more than heard. Every dimensional weak point, from the misty highlands to the sunstone deserts, destabilized at once, bleeding chaotic light into the sky. The sky itself fractured, a spiderweb of violet cracks, spreading like a terminal disease. Elara felt the simultaneous collapse in her very soul, a symphony of two worlds screaming into dissonance. The pressure from the other side was no longer a probe. It was a final, desperate shove. Rallying the fractured councils was her first, most desperate battle. "We stand together, or we fall into silence," she declared, her voice cutting through the panic. There would be no more debate, no more cautious committees. This was a moment for a single, unified will. Her command went out across the resonant crystal network, a call to every keeper, every sunstone elder, and the refugee beings of light. They would not fight the tier with force, but answer its chaos with the most powerful chord ever conceived, a global harmonic convergence using the combined energy of both biospheres. The plan was audacious, a tapestry of trust woven across a continent. Each group was assigned a key weak point, their task to channel their unique resonance into the network. The Sunstone tribe focused their crystalline energies. The refugees offered their chaotic, adaptive frequencies, and the keepers provided the deep, organic foundation of the forest's song. Elara positioned herself at the nexus, the first grove, where the two world cores met in her spirit. As the convergence began, the air thickened with power. Beams of emerald and bronze light shot from every corner of the world, meeting above the grove in a blinding, swirling vortex. The dimensional tiers flickered, resisted, and then began to shrink, the violent light yielding to the ordered harmony. But the cost was immense. The network groaned under the strain, threatening to shatter. Elara realized with a cold, final clarity that the conduit, her own bonded spirit, was not strong enough to bear the load. The personal connection to the cores that had defined her, that had given her purpose and power, was the final piece of fuel required. To save both worlds, she had to burn the bridge between them. Without hesitation, she reached into the very center of her being, to the twin rhythms that beat in time with her heart, and she let them go. It was not a release, but a gift, a torrent of pure self poured into the convergence. The surge was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The vortex of light solidified into a single, perfect chord of such profound beauty that it silenced the world. The last violet crack in the sky sealed with a sound like a gentle sigh, and the oppressive weight vanished, leaving behind an unbreakable, serene stability. The convergence was complete. The rifts were sealed forever. Elara collapsed to the soft moss, the silence in her spirit deafening. The deep, comforting pulse of the cores was gone. The whispered language of the trees, the crystalline hum of the desert, it was all just memory. She was mortal once more, a woman lying in the grass, her body aching with a profound and simple exhaustion. As her vision cleared, she saw them, the faces of her people, of the Sunstone envoys, of the shimmering refugees. They were not looking at a savior or a voice, but at a person. In that moment, she understood the final, hidden lesson of the architects. True architecture was not about grand control or holding the power of creation in a single hand. It was about planting the seed, nurturing the soil, and trusting the life within it to grow strong on its own. She had not built a kingdom with her power. She had built a community with her sacrifice, and that community was now the true, unshakable core of the Emerald Kingdom. The great work was finally, completely in their hands. The years settled upon Elara like a gentle moss, softening her edges but never dimming the quiet light in her eyes. She walked now not as the singular voice of the grove, but as its most beloved elder, a living library of the kingdom's greatest trials and triumphs. From a sun-drenched platform in the sunlit canopy, she watched the world she had helped mend. It was a tapestry woven from many threads, where keepers trained alongside sunstone geomancers, and the children of star refugees played games of light with village youngsters. The Emerald Kingdom was no longer a solitary secret, but the vibrant heart of a thriving alliance, a testament to what could be built when walls were replaced with bridges. Her legacy was not a monument, but a rhythm, a pulse she could feel in the hum of every new grove and in the confident hands of the keepers who tended them. They no longer needed her to lead them, and that was her greatest, most humbling victory. Her fulfillment came in the quiet moments of guidance, in the stories she shared not as commands, but as gifts. She would sit with a circle of wide-eyed children, her voice a soft rustle of leaves, and tell them of the hidden architects, not as distant gods, but as gardeners who understood that the most powerful magic was patience and care. She spoke of the self-made Biosphere, a world born from a single, defiant seed of hope, and of the simple truth that every great legend begins with one person's choice to step into the unknown. The power that had once roared through her veins was gone, but in its place was a deeper, more abiding strength, the profound satisfaction of a seed that had grown into a forest. The kingdom stood, resilient and ever-evolving, a living story whose next chapters would be written by the countless hands she had taught to hold the pen.